What's up, everybody? Does your life suck? Do you find yourself, suffering, depressed, anxious, stressed out, overwhelmed? You know, I think most of us do this time, especially with everything that's happened since 2020 with the pandemic and all. We've all been dealing with a lot. Well, you're in luck. Today, we're going to talk about reevaluating suffering and stress on the Existential Stoic podcast. This is episode 131. I'm Danny. I'm with my buddy Randy. What's up, Randy?
Hey, Danny.
Yeah, so, why do you think we should reevaluate suffering and stress?
Well, I would say that most people, and I'm not saying myself, I never do this, but most people don't enjoy suffering and don't enjoy being stressed. But
Really?
yeah, but there can be things that we can learn from them, we can grow from them. And if you believe, I mean, maybe you can even enjoy them. That's kind of weird,
Oh,
though. Yeah.
no, I think, it's interesting. We see this in a lot. In particular, Friedrich Nietzsche, but a lot of other philosophers, talk about the importance of kind of rethinking and reevaluating how we interpret suffering and stress. And Nietzsche in particular was very, this was a crucial thing for him was we need to rethink how we interpret suffering because, we can interpret it in a way that makes it something that is kind of, in a sense, beneficial to us, positive or negative. And it just really depends on us, right? It's one of those things where everything we do, it really depends on how we interpret it, how we respond to it. And so that's got to be the first point of sort of departure if we want to make positive changes. On a
Yeah.
side note, though, it's funny because I think no one seems to like suffering and stress. But you ever notice that, like, in some cases, whether in your own life or you see it with other people where they are depressed or they are stressed or something, and then they get in that negativity loop and then they seem to thrive on it.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's always
Misery loves
interesting when that
company.
happens. Yeah, it's always interesting when that happens because it's like, they don't like it. But at the same time, it's like almost like they get caught in this thing where they need it, or I don't know.
It's
It's happened to me and I'm not even sure how to describe it exactly what's going on, but like it's a weird process.
because it's a quick
Yeah.
fix and it's providing a little smidgen of relief. You
Yeah.
just get addicted to it and then you think that's what it is. But yeah, I mean, I can
Yeah.
I can totally relate because it's I the older I get, the more I'm finding I have such an inability to actually maintain peace of mind and pleasure in my life. So like
Yeah.
I get these points where I'll like achieve peace of mind. And like if it's more than a day, I'm just like, oh boy, wow, this is something else. Because like it's almost inevitable that something else is going to come up and just totally shatter that. And so
Yeah, it's funny. I was just gonna say it's really funny because you mentioned the age thing. I think like I've noticed with age that I feel like I'm better at experiencing those moments. But you're right. It's like they don't like I don't know. It's weird. Like when you're younger, it's like they seem to just be perpetual almost. And maybe it's because like responsibilities, things like that, long-term thinking, you're more mature in that sense. You're more concerned with those things. So they become more, you have more stresses, essentially, more responsibilities. Maybe that's simply it. But yeah, it is funny though. It's funny how that happens. And like, even when you're in a good situation, and we talked about this before, right? That fear of like even losing momentum or losing steam and like all of a sudden things will fall apart. Just these like worries we place on ourselves all the time.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
it's pretty
think I
funny.
think part of the responsibility for why we're not able to maintain it is the if then fallacy. So if this happens, then I'll be happy. If I have this,
Yeah.
then I'll be happy. If this problem goes away, then I'll be happy. If I have that, then I'll be happy. Because when we're kids, yeah, we think about that stuff. We're like, oh, I want to be a fireman. I want to be an astronaut. But really, we could care less because we're so happy just interacting with the world as it
Yeah.
is. Like, how many times do you remember as a kid just looking at nature and being totally fascinated? Whereas nowadays, we we overcome one problem. Like I specifically remember March of this past year, I had a problem I was working on for a long time that I finally overcame, and like I was overjoyed for like 2 days until the next thing just
Yeah.
cramped down and shattered my peace of mind
Yeah.
and my hope and everything like that. And I was just like, well, once I get through this, then I'll be happy. Once I get through that,
Yeah.
then I'll be happy. So yeah, I think
Well,
that's
you
part of it.
mentioned something else really important right there, though. Again, that kind of hints back to that age thing. But you mentioned that you touched on that idea that like, when we were kids, like none of that mattered. See, you were able to be happy in the moment, to enjoy now, to enjoy just like the the nature or the world around us, whatever, to be still curious about it and amazed by it. And it's funny because that's another thing you see in a lot of philosophies, like Buddhism. Again, I'll go back to Nietzsche because I already mentioned him. Like, I mean, so many thinkers mention, the importance of like the wise person getting back to like the state of the child, or something about like the mentality of the child, something along those lines. Not being a child, but getting into that mindset of like everything can be new, everything can be amazing, getting rid of all this like, so much of the stresses and worries we do suffer are like constructed, right? They're things from just society, they're not real. And getting back to what really matters, kind of, in a sense. So that's another one. I think that's another good point. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah,
that's
it's
something
funny.
that, I try and do that every once in a while, especially when I notice that I'm disappointed. So like some activities that I'll do is just going around my room and recognizing what I already have. Because
Oh,
many times I'll be disappointed because there's this thing that I want that I don't have. And then I go around my room and I'm just like, oh my goodness, I have this. Oh, so lucky. And then I have this. Oh, so lucky. And then I have this. So like that's really good. And also incorporating that with gratitude. And also, like, specifically when I'm feeling in the dumps, oftentimes that doesn't feel like enough, because I have this if then fallacy. If this negative feeling leaves me, then I'll be happy. And
yeah.
I'm doing these actions, and it's like this just isn't doing it. But that's not the point. Like, the point is just
No.
doing the actions. Eventually it'll turn around. All you need to do is just keep doing the actions, whether it feels good or not.
It's funny when you mentioned that before, the looking around your room, kind of being grateful for what you have, and identifying, acknowledging what you have. And I've done that for a long time. Actually, I think my whole life, whenever I feel down or like hard to get out of bed, I'll look around. And it's funny because I meant to mention this to you before. I was listening to another show, and they were talking about the woman who wrote the book Good Night Nobody. It's a children's book where like basically a rabbit says goodnight to all the things in his room. But the idea came from that, I guess she had depression, and whenever she couldn't get out of bed, she would look around her room and mentally make a list of all the things she was grateful for and then write them down. And this was like the reverse thing, basically. Instead
Hmm.
of doing that to get out of bed, it was a way to go to sleep, right? For kids. But I think it's interesting because, the reason I brought it up, a lot of us do these little things that we don't think of as being, something other people do. Like, I would never thought other people look around their room and do that like you do. But like, it's funny that we kind of like, when you start talking about it, you realize like a lot of people have similar tricks and tools that they use to help sort of get their mental state up, to get the right attitude, to get positive. And so I think that's also helpful too, because it makes you realize that like it's not this magical thing. It's something you do. It's something you work on. It's something that you use tools and tricks, right? It's not like something we just have to be happy or whatever.
I
You have to
can
put work in.
I can totally imagine SpongeBob doing that, just being like, "Good
Yeah.
night, Patrick. Good night, Squidward. Good night, Gary. Good night, Gary's ball. Good night, alarm clock.
Yeah.
Good night, bed. Good night,
There might be
pillow."
an episode where he does, I think. Yeah. Dude, I don't know. That's just so happy. It's so funny.
Yeah. But
So
also,
positive.
I was reminded of that song. These are a few of my favorite things. So like raindrops on roses and
Yeah.
all of that. Because that's another thing. You just think like we feel like crap because we have this mental loop of just negative things going on. And really,
Yeah.
your mind will go wherever you want. But like, if you want to feel better, just have mental loops of positive things.
Well, I think this is one tool, I think where that's really important worth mentioning, which is one way to start looking at stress and suffering is to start thinking of it as what it is. It's negativity and, negative attitude, negative state of mind, and start trying to do little exercises like this to remind yourself and bring yourself out of it, right? To reinforce that positive side, to reinforce that you're still good. And there's more, I mean, there's more things beyond it, but I think that it is a crucial one. And I think it just cracks me up because when you talk to people, you find out I think everybody has these little things they do, but we all act like the people that seem happy are just naturally that way, or just always that way. And they don't do anything. It's like, so there's something wrong with me or something wrong with the world or whatever. And it's interesting. I think that's one of the hard things though, always, is that, no matter what we struggle with, it's like everything takes work. It
Well,
takes some sort of putting effort in.
and so here's the thing, like, I think by nature we're lazy because human beings wanted to survive. So like we had to be lazy somewhat with using our energy, or else we'd run out of it because you
Security and comfort, right? Those are the two
yeah,
main things.
yeah. But where I was going with that was that I don't remember. So we'll come back to it.
when I rudely interrupted and threw off your whole train of thought. I'm sorry.
But all
I
right,
ruined
it'll come back in 5 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so okay, so we
Oh,
mentioned
here we
sort of one
go.
thing
I'm
already, which
sorry.
is
One
oh, go
minute.
ahead.
It's back
No, go
already.
ahead. Go ahead.
So like,
Go ahead. That's good.
everybody wants this life of comfort where we don't have to do any hard work, we don't have
Yeah.
stresses, we don't have suffering. So let's take a look at some real life examples of things that happen when there's no suffering, when there's no stress. So if you want to get in shape, if you want to build muscle, you need to stress your muscles. You need
Yeah.
to suffer a little bit. No pain, no gain. So like there's
Yeah.
that example. Here's another one. They were doing a biodome experiment to try and determine if they could make plants live
With
in
Pauly
space.
Shore?
Yeah, I know that
No.
was a great
Okay.
one.
Okay.
And so to make plants live in space, and so they planted these trees in the biodomes, and then the trees grew big, and then all of the trees, as soon as they got to a certain height, they all fell over.
Oh,
And they
I
couldn't,
read about that.
yeah,
Yeah.
they couldn't figure
Yeah.
out why this was happening, but it was because there was no stresses on the trees, no wind making their roots grow out stronger. So again, you need stress, you need suffering in order to
Wait,
survive. And even they've
the
shown
plant.
with
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
even they've shown with like bone healing and stuff like that. Your bones will actually heal faster if you stress them a little bit.
No, I was gonna say it's interesting. The plant world gives us a lot of examples. You know, I know that when if you're doing gardening or if you're growing vegetables and stuff, a lot of times they require some sort of stress in order to make the fruit or the whatever the crop is better, tastier. A lot of times that sort of stress on it makes them hardier. There's a lot of things where I think if we look at the natural world, we can see a sort of like we can see an idea being sort of manifested that we can apply to ourselves. And when you really look at our lives, you realize that like everything that's difficult, every stress, it's a way for us to grow. It's a way for us to make ourselves stronger, more capable, better equipped to deal with things in the future, right? Just like you said, exercise, you have to push yourself to that point where it hurts in order to increase. If you really want to do well at a certain skill or something, you have to push yourself to learn a lot and keep doing it, right? And it's going to suck sometimes, but doing that makes it that it's easier later, right? It makes it that you're capable later. And I think this is the one thing we have a hard time seeing when we're in the moment, that the suffering is an opportunity to learn. It's an opportunity to grow. It can be a positive thing because it's a challenge for us. But oftentimes I think a lot of us miss that because we're too focused on the negative rather than how we can turn it into a positive or how it can be beneficial for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're kind of like overly concerned with the short term, take the suffering or stress away, as opposed to the long term benefits of living with the stress and developing in it.
Well, I think too, like stress and suffering can be good signposts too, because look, if it's not something you really want, you shouldn't be, you should basically turn away from it, right? And focus your energies elsewhere. But if you're suffering and you're stressed and you're pursuing something you want, or it's because of something you want, or it's because of the life that you're living, that's, a good life for you, you should then figure out how to overcome it, because that's giving you those skills. That's developing the character. That's developing all the things you need to be essentially a better you in the world, right? Mm-hmm. And, just like the plants need that to produce better or become hardier, or the trees needed something so that the roots were actually not just like basically there in the loose soil. I think those are good examples in the world, and we don't look to nature and stuff that much really to kind of think about ourselves often. We think of ourselves as so different, even though, we totally are.
Yeah. And then also I think that we see a lot more of this not wanting the suffering or stress, usually because we're overthinking it. Like we keep thinking about, like, okay, it's bad enough that whatever happened, but then we just keep replaying that over and over and over and over and over again ad nauseum, and it just makes it that much worse. Like the Buddha used to have an analogy about two arrows. He was like, if you get shot with an arrow, would it hurt? And they're like, yeah, of course that would hurt. And he'd be like, okay, well, if you got shot with a second arrow, do you think that would hurt a little bit more? And they'd be like, yeah, because now you have two arrows in you. Of course that would hurt more. And he's like,
way worse.
He's like, that's what happens in life. Like these things happen to us. That's the first arrow. But that second arrow, we do that to ourselves. That's the mental suffering we do. And that's something we actually have a choice over what we can do with it. Because, there's what life does to us, and then there's how we handle it, what we make of it.
Yeah. how we respond, the meaning we give it. And I think this is where like literally every philosophy agrees, right? That this is where our agency, our ability, our self-control comes in, and we can actually do something to make it better. I like that example too, though, because it's funny, like I've noticed myself getting much better at it at this stage in my life, yet I still struggle with it. It's so easy to make it worse. It's like, and I'll give you a quick example. I'm sure you went through this before, like, you don't feel good, so you're tired, so you're not getting stuff done, which is like, okay, fine. And you realize that, maybe you're not feeling well or whatever, but then you start mentally beating yourself up. Then you start making yourself depressed. You start saying, oh, you're never going to get, this goal, or you're never going to be this because you're lazy and you're a loser and idiot. It's like, we start to sort of then attack ourselves, and we get caught in this sort of thing. And it's like, I've gotten better at recognizing it, which is helpful because then you can pull yourself out of it. And I think this is what people don't realize too about it. Yeah, it takes a lot of time to develop these things, but one of the great benefits is you get more self-awareness. And when you have more self-awareness, yes, it might still happen because things are, there's always things that are going to happen, but you're much more equipped to deal with it. And it won't be such a drain on your life or such a long, bout of suffering or depression or whatever. It'll be, a couple hours or whatever. It'll resolve quicker, and you're not so affected by it, I think.
Yeah. And it's a skill that you just kind of work on a little bit at a time, but being persistent, you get better. Like that's something that I'm practicing specifically this time of year, because from New Year's until the end of March is historically just generally a difficult time of year that I've experienced in my life. And
same here. So I don't know. It's gotta be something, right?
Yeah. And so like just recognizing that this time of year, things are going to happen, but choosing to acknowledge that and be generous with myself. So being patient, also being compassionate with myself, being like, hey, I still love myself. So like, we'll get through this. It's just take a breath. It's only another month and a half. So like, yeah. But it's kind of having that ability to see it for what it is, as opposed to getting smacked upside the head by it every year.
Well, that's the tough thing too, is I think, and that's the thing you learn when you put any of these things into practice, or even just try to start working on it and acknowledge it, is you realize that, like, I would say 99% of the time, at least for me, is all it requires is taking a step back, acknowledging what's going on, and realizing how I'm responding, and that the way I'm responding is not the way I want to respond. And it doesn't mean I necessarily then immediately switch and I'm like, yay, but at least it stops that negativity, right, from continuing on forward. Like it makes things better in that way.
That may also be helpful if you just change it and be like, yay.
Yeah, that might help. If I just did that constantly, I probably would feel better, right? But it's funny though, because I think that's like, it's like, because you say things like, looking around your room and saying these things that you're grateful for, like doing the small delights, or like, being more self-aware, acknowledging things. It sounds so simple and little, and not like a lot of, not a lot of efforts required, but at the same time, it's like, sometimes that's all it takes to at least get that, to get the line moved a little. And because I think most of the time we get ourselves in these like loops because we're not really self-conscious. We're not really self-aware. We're letting ourselves get caught up in emotions and the blame game and victimization. And then, then we lose ourselves.
We get distracted by a million things. There's a million distractions, because generally it probably is pretty simple. Like if you just love yourself, like really just love yourself, you're probably going to do fantastic, and no matter what comes. Yeah. Because if you're suffering,
and realize that, like,
you'll love yourself, because why would you not? Like if a good friend of yours was suffering, why would you not love them? And like, if you can treat yourself like that, then you'll be fine. But we get distracted. We think, oh no, it's gotta be more complicated than that. Like clearly I need to have 6-pack abs. I need to have $10 million in the bank. I need to have the biggest house, the best car. And it's like, these are all just distractions.
Well, that's the other thing, right? Because we also pretend like things matter that just don't matter. We give way too much meaning to superficial things, to empty things. And the downside of that is, one, it's sometimes it makes life really hard because you get all these ideas in your head that can't happen right now. And two, you're also not focused on what really matters to you. So ultimately, even if you do get them, you're still in the same situation. You haven't really made anything better, honestly better for yourself. I think that's it. We just don't, I think a lot of us don't know ourselves, don't spend enough time thinking about it, reflecting on it, and being self-aware. And that's a huge step, I think, towards dealing with, and rethinking suffering and stress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
I think, okay.
So here's another way to rethink it is
Mm.
to first recognize there's always going to be there.
Yeah.
Like people think that it's going to go.
Didn't Buddha
I
say
mean,
life is suffering?
when I say people, I clearly mean myself because I'm always like,
Oh yeah.
oh yeah, once I get to this thing done, then I'll be happy forever after, you know?
Wait, isn't the rule of thumb take yourself and generalize wildly? Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Ah,
Yeah, but it's like it's so easy to think that like once you get this, then I'll be happy. Then all things will be settled. But it's just part of life that like,
mm,
there are problems, there's suffering, there's stress, and just learning how to deal with it gracefully. Like I used to do Bikram yoga, and I really enjoyed that because it was very uncomfortable. And it's done in a room that's like
wait,
100
what is
some
it?
Bikram yoga, hot
Okay.
yoga. It's
Yeah, I know
done
what
in a
you're
room
talking
that's
about.
like
Yeah.
100 degrees. There's 26 poses and 2 breathing exercises. Takes an hour and a half. So you're like dripping sweat, super hot, doing these
Hmm.
crazy bendy poses. It's very uncomfortable, but I liked it because it was teaching me to relax in the discomfort.
Hmm.
Because you're in a pose for like a minute, 2 minutes, something like that, and it's painful and you're tired and you can barely breathe because it's 100 degrees and humid and it stinks in there and like all these things, and yet you're supposed to like relax and be peaceful. And so like I enjoyed that training because I looked at it like a life lesson. Like this is teaching me how to relax in the discomfort because there's going to be plenty of times in my life that are uncomfortable and I need to learn how to be present in them.
It's funny. There's a lot of things we can do like that. Like I found myself like hiking, and especially like backpacking, is a great like example of that because one, it's really hard, like really hard. It's difficult. You can feel miserable at times, but at the same time, like I at least personally, I want to be out there, and I really love seeing that stuff. And you can't see it otherwise. So like, it's that contrast between like this is really difficult, but I really want to enjoy this. So you still enjoy it even in light of that, right? That just becomes something where you're like, yeah, I got through that. I did it. Like that's awesome. And then you can do it again. Like I think that's the other crucial point.
Hmm.
I think to sort of interpreting suffering positively, which is really hard. And again, this is like I mentioned before, Nietzsche was really big into this, reinterpreting it. But I think there is something to that. Looking at challenges, obstacles, stress, suffering as chances for growth, for change, for discovering ourselves, for discovering what we're capable of, and ultimately self-overcoming, right? Becoming a better version of ourselves. Looking at it that way can really transform how we understand it. Because a lot of us, I think a lot of people look at suffering as something that needs to be destroyed, gotten rid of, right? You think of like, we talked about before, I think the last big fix, right? People want to be rich so they don't so they don't have to do anything. And it's like the life of complete comfort and pleasure. And it's like with no suffering, but that means no growth, right? That means no, continued living really. And I think reinterpreting suffering as an opportunity, I think, is difficult, but it's also a way to turn it into something positive. To look at it not as just something that's a drain on us, but something presents a way to grow, presents a path forward.
Yeah. And it's good to evaluate your suffering and your stresses
Yeah.
because a lot of
Right.
us don't do that, and just figuring, is this something worth suffering or being stressed for? Like
Yeah.
I remember how you were saying earlier, like, is this something losing my peace of mind over? Is this worth getting angry over and stuff like that? Because it's like a lot of these things we just get angry and we don't think, is this really worth it? Is this getting me where I want to go? And then like if it's suffering that you can't change, asking a better question, being like, how can I make the most of this situation? So
Yeah.
like for instance, a couple of years ago, I had to go back and work as a veterinarian, and I didn't really want to do it. So I was like, how can I make the most of this situation? Because I knew I had to do it, but I was like, how
Yeah.
can I make the most of this situation? And I was able to do a few things to do that. And it really
And we
helped
got
me
to meet
grow
up
as a
every
person.
week. That
I
was
know.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, that was awesome. That's when we started the podcast. I mean, heck.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. it's funny too, I think, because I think personally, one of the things that's helped me the most, and I think that's really crucial, is, just trying to be more self-aware of how you're feeling, what you're feeling, and why. And really, it is difficult. And like, I think it's funny how hard it is sometimes to be self-aware and to be like aware of what's happening in our mind. I know it sounds kind of weird sometimes, but it is. And once you start acknowledging these things, I think that has such an impact because it gives you the power to start really thinking about them in a way that's, in a sense, abstracted from it, not caught up in it. And that gives you a chance to really evaluate, is this worthwhile? Is this something I care about enough to even go through this? Is it necessary? It's funny. Like, I remember, I mean, I'm sure there's times in everybody's life where you take on a project or something you hate, and it's like totally a burden to go through. And then if you really ask yourself, why am I doing this? Should I be doing it? I mean, sometimes it's okay to just walk away from stuff if it's like that. And I think it's got to be something we're really, really worthwhile to us. But that's when those moments, those challenges become such an opportunity for growth, such an opportunity to define ourselves in the world. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think those are some good insights into reevaluating stress and suffering.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else? I don't have much.
I mean, I would just say, I guess, to reiterate, I would just say, like, be gentle with yourself, be easy with yourself. And, I think keep in mind too that no change is immediate. Everything takes time, and kind of, it's okay to even laugh at ourselves sometimes when we keep finding ourselves returning to the same problem, because, sometimes it's a helpful way to get through it. And I think it's necessary. It's just life. It's not
That's a great point, because there's this saying that all a man's problems come from his inability to sit still and do nothing. And so like we have these things happen to us, and it's uncomfortable, and we want to run away. And so we'll do that again and again and again, but it just keeps coming up because we haven't confronted it. And then once you kind of just sit with it and confront it, then it can pass. So yeah, I think that's part of it too.
Nice. That's good then. So how to kind of rethink stress and suffering. This is episode 133, I think, or 131. Sorry, 131. Check us out on YouTube. Listen to us where all, everywhere podcasts are available. Please subscribe, share. It helps us out a lot. We'll be back midweek with another quick fix. Until then, though, it was a lot of fun. Later, Andy.
Later, Danny.